All right, welcome for joining us tonight. We got Vineyard Politico to help people kind of understand and get an update onto the saga of LRS and Vineyard City and kind of understanding what happened with the loan. There were quite a few more documents that came out, a massive amount. And I wanted to bring in Ben Abbott before we move through all the new stuff. We wanted to set the ground and go through kind of chronologically for anyone that's new, hasn't been able to follow it, and then we'll go through all the new stuff. So Ben, take it away.
Thanks, Jake, and thanks everyone for tuning in. It's really good to talk with you. I love questions, and so if people have questions or things to add, feel free to interrupt at any time. I'll try to keep this to just a 5 minutes or so to give an overview of what's happened over the past few years. And actually, I wanted to start with just a couple words about Utah Lake. So Utah Lake, since about the 1990s, there's been a comprehensive restoration effort. A lot of that's been focused around the June sucker fish. So the June sucker recovery implementation program put in place in the early 2000s. And they have been doing amazing work on the lake. As for all big ecosystems, right, it takes time for that to heal and for it to recover, but we have a good trajectory there. Algal blooms, we now have satellite records that go back about 50 years. The algal blooms have decreased by about half since the 80s and 90s when I was a kid on the lake, and we used to wear the t-shirt that said "Ski the Scum." Fast forward to 2017. 2017, this company called Lake Restoration Solutions starts lobbying the legislature. They get some legislation passed that was just a resolution saying, hey, we need to really change directions on Utah Lake. That was Mike McKell and Deidre Henderson that pushed that through. Later that same year, they submitted an application to Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, the division of the Department of Natural Resources that manages the lake. And this application asked for an undetermined amount of land within and around the lake in exchange for a restoration project. And what's strange about that is, of course, that application came just kind of over the holiday period, and it came before the legislation had actually been passed to allow this kind of proposal to be considered. So
we pause on the irregularity of someone submitting a proposal when there hasn't even been a bill passed.
Yeah. So the Utah Lake is a type of state land called sovereign lands. And these are the highest level of protection of state law. For example, when the federal government came in and tried to drill for oil on Utah Lake during the oil crisis, the state government was able to say, no, this is meant for the people of Utah in perpetuity. They were able to stop that development. And so it's very, very irregular. Typically with sovereign lands, you can't purchase them from the state. You can do a land swap where you say, okay, I'm going to give you this parcel in exchange for a similar parcel, right? That would be of greater value to the state because you have to maintain the overall amount of these lands. So it's very irregular that they were asking for a TBD number of acres of Utah Lake. In 2018, the curtains kind of pulled back and this bill was put forward called the Utah Lake Restoration Act that created a pathway for lands to be transferred to a private party in exchange for a long list of different kinds of restoration work. And the project was received by FFSL, this application from 2017. And the technical term that FFSL used was it was accepted by the division. That just meant that it was received. And they were very clear. It didn't represent an endorsement or that the project would move forward. That was just like, hey, we received the proposal, right? But the group LRS started going around telling everyone, we have state sponsorship, the EPA loves our project. And that's when I got involved. I grew up here in Utah County, but I started at Brigham Young University as a professor of aquatic ecology in 2017. And so I kind of caught the end of that year and the beginning of 2018. And it was really troubling to see what they were proposing, because it was not a restoration project. It was a giant development project. And we started to organize. Some students and I and other professors wrote some op-eds in the newspaper. We met with the developers. The original developers were named Todd and Ben Parker. And I actually thought that they were generally good guys. The project was a bad idea, but they seemed to be operating honestly and in good faith. They were public about what they were trying to do. But thankfully, after about a year, it seemed like the project lost momentum. It kind of disappeared. We thought it was all done with, until in 2021, we found out that they had been operating. Had been very busy behind the scenes with no public presence. New leadership had taken over. Ryan and John Benson, another pair of brothers, except these guys had, particularly Ryan Benson, a long history of siphoning off state funds and getting involved in what I would call shady projects. For example, lobbying against gray wolves, a species that doesn't occur regularly in Utah at all, right? They got, over a period of years, over $12 million to do that lobbying work without ever disclosing where the money went. Ryan Benson is still in a lawsuit right now with the Utah Investigative Journalism Project, trying to keep those documents from the public eye. We were very alarmed. We organized this symposium. That's actually, Jake, where you and I met at UVU. And it was really cool at the symposium to hear the diversity of projects on Utah Lake. It was very positive. But LRS was very upset that the scientific community, the management community, were talking about Utah Lake and representing it correctly, that it was on a slow and delicate but sure road to recovery. And we now know this because of these documents. They began a series of campaigns to try to undermine people's credibility, to try to attack them personally, to including thinking about retribution for entire cities that weren't on board with the project. But kind of awareness began to grow, thanks in large part to people in Vineyard City, right, who really were at the front lines. And in late 2021, it came out, a concerned citizen, that LRS had tried to recruit to be their CFO, had their investment pitch. And in that slideshow, we saw these letters of commitment from Mayor Fulmer, from Dan Hemmert in the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, from some of the investors. And this we were totally blindsided by this. Right, there had been no public support, at least no public discussion of this support, and we began to talk about this. We shared information with the governor's office. Thankfully, they got that information, including a letter that was signed by over 120 or 114 experts, scientists, lawyers, engineers that brought up a series of concerns about the science of the project and also the way that it was moving forward. We understand that the governor's office canceled the announcement of a public-private partnership that was planned just days later. So thankfully that stopped, but this left us with all this information about, okay, how did Vineyard City end up being listed as a sponsor on the project? So I think I'll turn it over to you there, Sean, and then we can pick up after the grama battle, if that's okay.
Perfect. I'm going to share my screen if you don't mind then. Sometimes I talk better with pictures.
Yep.
You have to enable that, Jake.
Yep, you got it.
All right. So
before you do that, let me kind of tie in where I'm at. At that time, I'm Wakara Way. My family owns a few different segments, different families through Shadrach Holdaway, like the Clugs have a portion, which are holdaways, we're holdaways. We're the only ones that are working with the Lake Commission at that time to donate land. And we are talking to them about that. And we did not know at that time that behind, without us knowing, the state was obviously selling the lake bed, the 20,000 acres. And we were talking about don't put a roadway or don't put anything or don't develop, let's do open space and nice things. And so when that dropped is when we came in and said, you know, you guys aren't working in the light of day about anything or around this. And so Julie's question started out as, or when we approached her, when we did get that letter, Julie first had her story, or our Mayor Fulmer story was that it was a grant. And obviously looking at that letter, it does not say grant. It says, you know, it's a WIFIA loan. And I don't know if you want to pull up the website, but there is no place on the WIFIA EPA website where it ever talks about a grant. It's always a loan.
Yeah, I wanted to, I'll show.
Anyway, I'll let you go into that. So
Well, I was gonna say, I'll show what they classify as what that loan guarantee actually means by the letter of the law in the WIFIA thing, so. But sorry, I didn't cut you off there, Jake.
oh, and so it was so bizarre to read an email saying we're committing to give you 5, and then hear the mayor and say, no, they're giving us 5. And so within a few weeks, had another conversation with the mayor, and it changed to, well, they're wording it differently than me. I can't control a public or a private company. They could have stolen my signature. And at which point I was like, call the attorney general and have him prosecuted for stealing your signature and, you know, putting yourself on a loan. Why are you privately meeting with developers and then asking us for donation, you know, and kind of working us through that? And so there was multiple people that sent us screenshots of Julie's various stories. I think you're going to cover that, of just different ways in which she explained it. And so we just decided, well, let's not, without questioning or attacking, let's just go to the public record and get into the grama. And so for those that don't understand grama is the government records, government records, accountability management, something. Basically states that a public record, you can get access to it, and you can petition the city to go through and get those. They cost a lot of money. Sean paid $600 with the help of a few others to petition the city to go through and do that. And so anyway, Sean, take away.
Yeah, so I'll go through this presentation, but long story short, this is kind of what we presented at the SRC, the state. And I wanted to do this just because to give you a timeline of where we are. So Ben left off in 2021. I was already in the middle of a fight against another project that our leaders had overstepped and overreached as far as zoning and density and stuff. So right in the middle of that fight, I get this information from some and noticing that, you know, this directly impacts the city of Vineyard, and not just city of Vineyard, but also this project that I'm fighting against. And so I'm already kind of up in arms in this referendum, and I take this to a city council meeting. I take the letter that Julie signed, Mayor Fulmer, that she signed, this loan guarantee letter, and she was a no-show at that meeting, which was the final vote on the Clegg property rezone. So already upset over the Clegg property rezone. Mayor's a no-show at one of the biggest votes of her administration. And so I started digging into that. This is the letter of support, the WIFIA application that's included in that. We'll get a little bit more. I'm not going to read it all, but that's the $5 million loan guarantee. This was part of that WIFIA application at the federal government. So I started the process in October of 2021. So we're almost 2 years, right? And looking at that, you know, we had to go through the process. We had to request formally. We tried to get some information without going through the grama. At the end of the day, we got zero answers, zero help, zero anything. And I was looking at it saying, this is the biggest project to ever hit Utah County, let alone the city of Vineyard. There's got to be stuff out there. Maybe I missed those council meetings, maybe whatever. So I spent a couple of months researching it before we took it to the grama level, and there was just absolutely nothing going back as far as I could. I went back several years. There was no real discussion about that, no discussion at all about this, and where it directly impacts 100% of the residents of Vineyard, because that phase one came through 400 South and then 8th North or 16th North, one of those two. So we started the formal process in January 2022. It's a lot of information. City recorder requested an extension. I'm okay with the extension. Pam sent costs over. You know, we appealed things left and right, stating we shouldn't have to pay for something like this. This is public interest. It's a loan guarantee document and taxpayer dollars going to this project. Why should we have to pay for it? So back and forth with some appeals. Ezra was good to work with, back and forth a little bit, but ultimately decided to kind of split it. So, you know, took a couple months to really begin that grama process. He okayed it and everything, and then a little bit of slowdown as he's making sure they got paid. And then finally in April, we got the grama complete, and I'm going to get into the completion of the grama, but April 4th was that record request was completed. I had 30 days to appeal it. You'll see why in a moment, why I appealed that, because we got absolutely nothing out of it. We did have a couple of mediation attempts with the city. This goes into August of 2022, September of 2022, into October, and just trying to go back and forth with, hey, city, you know, we don't believe you acted in good faith. This is why. Here's our reasoning. Here's the information. Let's figure this out without taking it to the state. At the end of the day, no mediation attempts were successful. They were somewhat unwilling. And so we took it to the state. Finally made it to the state on December 15th of 2020.
I want to pause because there's a little bit more teeth that need to go into that. When the original grama came out, they came back and said there were no documents. We got nothing out of it. And we had already known and spoken with the previous city manager, Jake McCarg, about how he knew there was a conversation about the loan, because at this time Julie is claiming that it's a grant, and we'd had Councilmember Nate Riley, Councilmember Chris Judd, both telling us we had never seen this loan, we'd never approved it, we were not involved in any of this. And so we facilitated a lunch with Jake McCarg, and at that lunch, Jake McCarg read the text messages between him and Julie discussing the loan. And while they're discussing the loan, Jake McCarg is pushing back, saying, you do not have the authority to sign on this loan. This is a loan. This would need to go through a public process, be on an agenda. Julie fights back and sends him a second iteration of the letter. More or less, they go back and forth, and finally Julie just says, hey, the people are telling me that I can sign it and go, and they go forward with it. And it was really a critical piece of evidence, because it showed that the mayor was hiding, that they were attempting to just, hey, is this a grant? Or if it's a grant, then just like put it out there, right? Like, what is it that you're holding on to it to be there? So when the initial grama came out, there was nothing in there. The text messages between Jake and Julie were not there. And it made us look stupid, because it was like, we expected, we already knew, we'd already read. And so we contacted Jake again, and we said, Jake, what's going on? He's like, I don't know. I'll contact Pam. I'll contact. And he said, and he gave us the exact date of when he sent it over. He said, I sent screenshots. I complied with grama. We do not know why. And he even emailed them in saying that they were there. So finally, Jake agreed to send them in. And we said that we would email the attorney at that time. Also during that conversation, we had a state employee get on that wanted to keep his name confidential, come in, and he knows a lot about grama and state records. And he just advised him of like, hey, you want to follow the law? These are government records. There's two ways you could do it. You could send it to the city, or you could send it to the state. And Jake ultimately said, you know what, I want to do the right thing, and I'm going to send it over to Pam. And the second he did, we emailed over and let the attorney know that we have found that. So we had to track this down. I mean, it was like we had to fight and say, please comply with the law, to be able to go through.
Part of the mediation was word for word in some of these emails where, hey, if there's documents out there that you guys find, just go ahead and give them to us. Just go ahead and let us know. But we're not going to disclose that there's anything else. It's up to you guys to go through this level of effort and find these documents. If you really think these documents exist, you guys go find them. We're not going to look anymore for them, because this grama was so broad that it basically said if anybody uttered the word LRS, Lake Restoration Solutions, Lake Project, whatever it was from 2015 to 2022, we need those documents. We should have had those documents. So when they came back with, and this just talks a little bit about the details of that. And I want to get to Jake's point here in a second, because I've got.
Well, and for those listening, at this point, it's bad faith, right? You're getting to the point of, you guys, like, if this is a grant, this is so childish and so back and forth and so Mickey Mouse that Jake Holdaway, a citizen, has to go and track down the previous city manager and help him comply to get to the truth. And Sean has to pay $600 to bring you to justice, basically. That's where it started to get sour. Like Julie and the various changing of her story. It was just like, Julie, this is not looking good, right? So.
Yeah. So you take the biggest project, like I said, from day one, the biggest project that we've probably ever seen here. I expected to hire some interns to sift through thousands and thousands of documents. And we got a total of 125 documents. 3 of them that mentioned the WIFIA letter of support. Now, this is text messages, emails, anything, meeting requests. It doesn't matter, anything. We had 3 documents out of that entire 8-year period that even mentioned the letter of support. And the first document was, here's the letter of support. Here it is. Not, hey, can you support us? And we got absolutely nothing. So that's what really kind of set us off on we're going to challenge this. We're going to appeal this at every single level. But getting 3 documents when we know there's more out there was not didn't feel good when I got an email full of absolutely nothing, because it's there and we've seen it. The grama appeal, I'm going to go through this quick so we can move on. But one thing I wanted to bring to attention, and there's the 2 different ones, but in the WIFIA loan itself, it states the City of Vineyard is another public sponsor of the project and has pledged an additional $5 million loan guarantee. And there's a couple references to a couple other letters, a $10 million Vineyard loan guarantee. But what WIFIA, the loan guarantee is defined in the WIFIA handbook is any guarantee or other pledge to pay all or part of the principal of an interest on a loan or other debt obligation issued by a borrower and funded by a lender. That's straight from the WIFIA handbook on what a loan guarantee such as Vineyard meant to them.
And again, there's nothing on the website that even has a grant section. Like, we don't do any of that. And so,
WIFIA is a financing program. The water infrastructure financing is the WIF, right? And Sean, I don't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to say, look, I think that we should always assume goodwill and good intent, right? Like I truly believe that most people are good people. And so for me, I was super disappointed at this point. I thought, Mayor Fulmer very easily could have been misled by these guys. They were smooth operators, right? They're really good talkers. They were able to throw all these names around. She wouldn't have been the only one. The thing that I was so disappointed about was seeing that she didn't respond to this information. The fact that they had misrepresented her letter, if we're taking her at her word, in a huge federal process, right? And right across the top of the application, it states, any misrepresentation of information is a criminal offense, right? And so I would have thought that immediately she would have had the Attorney General, the EPA, these people on, and I reached out to her and was trying to be extremely reconciliatory and understanding of her position, and asked for an explanation, and she unfortunately never responded.
And it's the same thing with you, Sean. I mean, me and you individually have said, hey, could you just come forward and let us know? Like, could we bring these documents in an open meeting? We didn't want to get and Sean's going to go through the variation of the story of different Facebook posts of like what she says and what she doesn't. And it continually changes. And so it's like, could we, we did put some, you don't want to meet privately with just one person and hear a story. You want it to be in a public record with a group of people with the documents and get to the bottom of like what is happening, especially because, and again, backing up as a government, Julie's not a queen. There's always a governing body of a city council, especially with $5 million that has oversight, and there's no agenda or anything like that. And so anyway.
Yeah, that's all we were looking for, was a few answers to some very simple questions. One of the main questions being, who approached you to be a sponsor, to be, to write this letter? Like, where was the initial interaction? And, with any project of any kind, with any request, there's always a request. This is, Jake calls it the Immaculate Conceived Letter, or whatever you call it, Jake.
Letter of Immaculate Conception.
Came from nowhere. But within the documentations that we were given, and within her own posts, she's talking about, the city was engaging and meeting with the Lake Restoration Group. Where were those engagements? Where were those meetings? Where are the minutes of that? If the city was meeting with the group, why didn't we get the documents? And there's so many things like that we laid out that just were not turned over for whatever reason. We even brought up the Hartleys and their connection with Vineyard City, being Vineyard City lobbyists and being a lobbyist for LRS. If you look at the Hartleys contract, Sage contract, there is a disclosure document of conflict of interest there. So they stated there's no conflict of interest with anything the Hartleys are doing and City of Vineyard doing. That alone is just blatantly lying.
Well, and Sean, you said that your grandma didn't get anything good. That is one of the specific laws that has been broken. And it's very clear in Utah's anti-corruption statute that you have to disclose those conflicts of interest. And so the fact that Hartley did not was a breach of law. And again, I would have thought that as soon as that came to the knowledge of the mayor, that he had this illegal, undisclosed conflict of interest, that immediate action would have been taken, right? And the Vineyard should be able to get the money back, and they have him on retainer. I checked 2 days ago. To this day, right? He still is registered as a lobbyist of Vineyard. So you, the people of Vineyard, are paying thousands of dollars every month for the privilege of having this conflicted lobbyist. That is the part that's extremely exasperating. This isn't just about past grievances. This is ongoing today.
Yeah, and I also synced with Provo City, a few different staff and members and everything. And for a city our size, it's extremely rare to have somebody at that level. They do sometimes retain attorneys or, consultants and lobbyists from time to time. But in terms of a city our size, it's just like, what's going on here,
And we could go on and on and on for hours about, references to documents and investigations. And the council and staff supported me in the investigation and support of the discovery. Council and staff had absolutely no clue.
Right.
Past council, current council. So you look at all of that stuff and everything. And
well, I will tell you, one of the things that is kind of changing the story with Amber's letter yesterday was where she said, oh, they presented it to us and we decided to go neutral. And you're like, that is years after the fact, after all this happened.
Yeah.
After you got caught, you guys, then the council knew about it. And then they decided to go neutral. Well, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, why did the old council and then even the new not know about it until the grama request of the EPA? That tells us that the no government process happened.
it stopped being about the lake after a few days of getting upset that there's this ridiculous project about to tie into Vineyard. It stopped being about the lake itself and the density and the project, and it started being about the city and the process and lack of transparency and the lies. And it stopped being about the lake a long time ago.
Yeah.
On my end anyway.
I totally agree. Yep.
Just crazy. So I don't know if we want to go through all this. This was just some of the stuff that these little trails, these little breadcrumbs that would just lead to absolute nothing. When you know there's more that began that trail, and you know there's more that ended that trail, and there's so much there. And then, you know, at the state meeting, when they chose to classify, I think 90 something documents, Jake, and that was just only because we brought that to light.
Well, now that's what was funny is that when it was at the vineyard level, they're supposed to disclose, you know, how much they're withholding or how much is protected, right?
Mhm.
And then out of the blue, it wasn't until you got to the state level where it was like, oh, we're protecting 91. It was like, wait a second, what? Before it was nothing, and then it wasn't until we got the text messages from Jake McCarr. How did it get to that level, right? And
Yeah, so I mean, if they're hiding that, what else is there? I mean, I can't imagine what other communication and coordination went on that just
right. And again, it goes back to Amber's, hey, this is a grant of them giving us money, then just make it public, you know, the conversations that you're having and whatnot.
Yeah, I've posed for 2 years now, a solid 8 to 12 questions, very simple questions. We've requested meetings. They wanted it to be part of the public open portion at a just typical city council meeting. I feel like it needed more attention. It needed its own special session where there was no time limit. Everyone could be open about things, and that hasn't happened. So these exact questions still exist.
Yeah, that was one of the things in Amber's thing was, oh, they've requested us to come in. And, you know, you do have to hand out to Amber. She really did. When we sent her, she emailed Ezra and said, hey, Ezra, there'd be like a meeting. And Ezra responded and said, yeah, let's try and get it. And then it went crickets. And then we'd say, hey, can we meet? And it just kind of, after being ignored. So Amber is right. Amber did try to get the city manager and others, and you got to take your hand off to her.
And Ezra, me and Ezra went back and forth, and he was willing to set up a sum. We had a couple of dates set that didn't quite work out for one side or the other. And then, you know, when it came to not being able to do a special session, that's just kind of when we're like, it's not worth it. We got to get everything out there. We can't be stunted by time or what we can actually talk about. You know, there was so much there that it wasn't worth a meeting at that point when we couldn't really meet on what we wanted to. And they can answer these questions at any time. We've directly asked several questions and they will not answer them. So
yeah.
Well, and also just why is the city manager saying you don't have the authority to do this? So could we bring him in, you know, to find out, you know, there's just so many things like that if it is a grant. So anyway, let's get into the new. Yep. Anything else we need to cover before the new information and stuff?
No, that kind of bridges that gap there and kind of what we went through in that couple of year process with the grama. And I can expand on that anytime if anyone's interested, because there is a lot more there than flying through a PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I put a link to, you know, Peggy Kleimanson from Saratoga Springs has compiled a lot of this together. And so I did put the link up to her Google Drive if people want to go through those documents themselves.
Yeah, what I don't like is a revisionist of history or a revisionist of like changing this or that. And it's like, you know, we're still waiting on that until these new. So Ben taking over, help people understand a little bit how we got the new documents and
yeah. So while this grama struggle was going on in Vineyard, LRS in January of 2022 sued me personally for $3 million, which still makes me laugh. They grossly overestimated the salary of a professor. Right. So this was a clear strategic lawsuit against public participation, a SLAPP lawsuit. And thankfully, the judge saw that nearly immediately. She threw out the case with prejudice and ordered LRS to pay attorney's fees. She said they also likely would need to pay damages to me for their illegal lawsuit. But there was still this question of intent, right? Because we knew that the lawsuit had no basis in fact or law, but then we needed to demonstrate what was the intent of LRS. Were they suing me because they believed that I had harmed them, or were they suing me to make an example and suppress my free speech rights? And so that allowed us to engage in discovery. That means asking the person that's suing you for additional documents. So we acquired more documents. This was in early 2023 after the judge's ruling. And then we also submitted a series of grama requests because we wanted to have any document where LRS contacted FFSL, for example, and discussed the lawsuit or discussed their opinion or approach to managing me. And so we submitted a lot of these grama requests, including to the Utah Lake Authority, so the group that has replaced the commission, the group that is chaired by Mayor Fulmer. And it was really interesting when we worked with the agencies, FFSL or the Division of Water Quality. It was very straightforward. We submitted the grama requests. We got the responses back. The most that we were charged by any of them was $100. And then we submit this request to the Utah Lake Authority. Takes a number of weeks. We get back the response. There were hardly any documents there, and they charged us $600 to do this request. And when I looked at it, it was so confusing because we had literally over 50 documents. When I just went into my email and searched some of these search terms, we knew that they had these documents. And so we responded very quickly and said, hey, where are the rest of these documents? And then all of a sudden the tone changed, and we got a response back from the Utah Lake Authority with their attorney CC'd that said, oh, well, we only gave you those documents because we interpreted your grama request as being an and everything. So basically, like if it says Ben Abbott and LRS and Erica Gaddis and any of these search terms, right? It was only those ones that everything overlapped. And then they also claimed that they may have deleted documents that were only transitory documents. And so we responded to that and said, well, wait a minute, there are multiple lawsuits going on. That would not be appropriate to destroy any of these documents. And anyway, where is your grama policy? Because you're only allowed to do that if you have a stated policy. For example, if you say, we retain all communications for 5 years and then we destroy them, that's legally defensible. But you can't just choose what documents to keep or not. So I'm making this longer than it needs to be. Basically went back and forth multiple times, and they finally admitted that they'd only given us the documents for the Utah Lake Authority, not the Utah Lake Commission, even though the grama portal for the Utah Lake Commission had been closed, right? This was the new entity. We thought it would include everything. So we had to submit an additional 2 grama requests to get these documents. In total, they ended up charging us $1,500 for documents which we believe, just as Sean said, should have been freely available. And if you contrast this, the Utah Inland Port Authority that's been pushing forward these developments, they have a portal. Anyone can get their documents for free. There is no charge, right? But somehow the Utah Lake Authority has implemented this extremely aggressive payment schedule. We are going through those documents now. We also got some of the documents from the lawsuit declassified, and all of a sudden the worlds collided. You know, we were looking for the intent of LRS. We got these new documents showing that many of which were applicable to the Vineyard attempt to understand what had happened with the mayor. Now, we've seen this pattern of dishonesty and retribution from these people. And so we want to be honestly very cautious. We also feel very committed to shining as much light as we can on this. And so here in this group, we want to share the initial findings of this. We're not yet ready to turn over the whole pile of documents, though we will as soon as we are able. And we got special, so talking with, we feel like this gets to the foundation of our communities and our country, that we need to have honest and transparent process in government. And so that's why we're taking this in a very methodical way. So we have already spoken with multiple attorneys about the best options moving forward. They recommended and said that we could share this particular document because of how directly it applies to what we've been talking about. I don't know, Jake, if you want to pull that up.
Before you do that, one of the things out of the bankruptcy that was just mind-boggling in the new documents, and I think we can talk about the cell companies, right? The different so the bankruptcy hearing, and then the documents you got out of that is,
well, I totally forgot this, Jake.
Am I allowed to talk about this?
Yeah, for sure. But I wanted to give a little bit of context here because this is really important. LRS was fighting this legal battle. When they saw that they were going to lose, we knew for a long time they were going to try to get out of this. In fact, one of the things they sued me for was pointing out that they were an LLC who could dissolve at any point, right, without accountability. What's really interesting, they didn't dissolve when the lawsuit started going south. They dissolved just days before they were going to have to sit down for depositions. And they declared bankruptcy, which puts an automatic stay on legal proceedings. And after we've looked through this, we think for sure they were more worried about the documents coming out than they were about the potential liability, right? For these guys, what's a few $100,000 that they're going to have to pay? But the fact that they were going to have to either perjure themselves or admit all of these connections was terrifying for them. And we think that they hadn't kind of played all of this through in their mind because Ryan Benson did have to sit down for this bankruptcy hearing. So this just happened a few weeks ago. He sat down for the bankruptcy hearing. The trustee, so this is the impartial person who's taken over LRS's estate, started asking basic questions about where their assets were, right? Where's this camera equipment that you purchased? You got this fancy stuff to make these films. Ryan Benson, I don't know. Where's this big professional printer that you bought? Where's that asset? I don't know. It was shocking. And then they got to the section where they had dispersed all of this money from LRS, from the lawsuit declarations just a few months before, 12 months before, they had $12 million in the bank. All of a sudden, fast forward to when this bankruptcy hearing, they have no money. And so they asked, the trustee asked about any related party transfers. So that means, if I was...
And let's pause quick. If you all remember, they were going out and doing billboards of private money and that we have all this money and there's this great person. The first thing that I saw about that was $12 million. I was like, what? That is like nothing.
Right.
And then number two is like, wait, but you're asking 5 million for Vineyard, like through a loan guarantee, and then you're asking 10. So wait, there's more government money. And then you're going for a federal loan of 500 and, whatever those $2 amounts. One was like 800 or 500 or 600, whatever. There's too many hundred millions of dollars, but it was like the bombshell in that was $12 million. That's not a lot of money to
total. Exactly.
A $6.5 billion.
That's right.
And by skipping a government process like Vineyard City, if there was a government process and there was a loan and council members or planning commission had the opportunity, they would be able to ask questions. That's why you have a government process.
Right.
That's why we care about it. And they would be able to say, hey, can you prove financially that you can finish this project before going bankrupt, right? Because if we're going to allow you more leg, and that was the bombshell that just came out, was like 12 million, that is dishonest. Like,
oh, totally. Well, and it gets to the point that there should have been due diligence. There should have been investigation before any of Vineyard City funds were committed. And that only happened in 2022, right? That was the first time that LRS came and presented to the city council. Right. That's unconscionable to me. And you had city council members saying, look, I don't know you. We've got people. It's a huge mess there.
I love that sorry, I love that you just brought it back, because you're right. They presented, once they got caught up in all this stuff, they presented in 2022 for something that was signed, sealed, delivered 2018 to 2021.
Right, but
Yeah.
but let's even go back. Let's go back to the night that
Backwards.
they came into Vineyard City, right? Ryan Benson gets pulled in because we find out about this, or we find out that it exists, right? We don't even know there's a loan. And Ryan Benson comes into a public meeting and he presents the whole thing, but he makes no mention whatsoever that we're connected to a loan that night. We're all sitting there. So all we are is hearing about this island. But
Yeah.
okay, so let's say you go and present to a city. You might want to bring up the fact during the presentation, and oh, hey, by the way, you're on the hook for $5 million and you're an investor in this project.
That's right. The city is already a sponsor of this project. It makes no sense. And again, this is not a personal attack against Julie or the city council or anyone. We just need answers to these questions.
Well, and that was what's so funny is, and that's what Amber is referencing is, oh, we decided to go neutral, and you're like, after that presentation and rescind the grant or whatever. It's like, it's not a grant, but like, we're trying to figure out how you manipulated this entire process, because Amber, a professor's getting sued in court already. Like, there's already so many. I mean, we're probably invested millions and millions of state dollars, the legislature, all these review. I mean, there's just a massive amount of money that we were able to, pay as tax dollars to even process this thing, right? So anyway, keep going. I just wanted to make sure that there were a lot of bombshells that was like, you're building a $6.5 billion project, and the court documents are showing you got $12 million.
That's right. 12 million and then $0, right?
Yeah.
They didn't even pay their consultants just a few $1,000s, right? It was a total emperor without clothes situation.
Yeah.
These guys were going around saying they have all this money. It looks like it was completely made up. We learned through this process that the main LP, limited partnership, that was raising funds for them, we saw in that tract that you showed, Sean, in the meantime, their investment license had been pulled. They were sanctioned for millions of dollars from the Security Exchange Council for a Ponzi scheme like situation. This is all, so this is why we needed to have that process, that presentation to the city council. That should have happened before the letter of commitment. And I actually find the argument that we do this kind of thing all the time to be really troubling, right? That means that we're saying yes to all kinds of things and committing city resources to all kinds of unvetted projects.
Right. And in the court documents, when you say that, like, again, if it went through a public process, you'd be able to vet and go, like, and that's why we were like, Julie, who were you meeting with? Like, right now to this day, we can't go and say, Julie, who were the 3 people that came in and met with you? What day, what time were you alone?
Yeah, exactly.
With you, was someone taking records? And then also, when they did give it, because of that, you're dealing with someone without a license. And then number 2, I mean, this is one of the biggest bombshells that came out. When you, in the documents, when you get the PowerPoint that this investor that doesn't have a license is going out to someone to say, invest in this, you're going, they only have $12 million to build that. Finding out who you went and defrauded, and did you get anybody to invest in this as well at this point? Like, did you? I'm not saying they did defraud, but like, you went out with our name, and obviously the PowerPoint is saying on the power, and Julie could say, well, all this is a grant. Well, the people that you're in bed with are calling this, and they're putting in the PowerPoint that you're invested on the dotted line here.
That's right.
And that was a new bombshell that was like, that came out in the court system as well. And so just finding out who, and maybe Vineyard City didn't rip them off, but this person was presenting something using our name. Why?
That's right.
Why as citizens can't we know that now? This is new information that we didn't know. And
why, as a mayor, is she not calling them out, right? Shouldn't, you would think, if they are misrepresenting her document, that she would be interested in correcting them and saying, this is not, and we see, we now know that Central Utah Water Conservancy District, a federal entity implementing the Central Utah Project, they wrote a letter to the Army Corps that says these people are misrepresenting the support they had. Because very similarly, they said, oh yeah, we're working with Central Utah on this project. And they responded and said, heck no. Like we've had meetings with these people. We haven't provided any material support. They were just trying. And this is ancient history. Go back to 2011. Ryan Benson and Don Pay, they were sanctioned by the NRA, the National Rifle Association, and the Safari Club, two of these big gun rights groups, that said, they sent a letter to every member of Congress. We are not working with these guys. That you should verify everything that they say, right? They have a history of this. And
Well,
if,
yeah.
yeah,
And now knowing, I mean, and I knew that before, right? But again, people are like, hey, LRS is dead. And you go, no, they will come back.
these same actors are still, they already are looking for the next thing.
And so
And
it's not to get an ounce of blood. It's to, how do you make sure this doesn't transition into something? And most government agencies are extremely transparent and are like, yeah, we don't want our name to be defraud any other investors. And we also need to know who we're working with. And also Hartley is still our lobbyist. So
yeah,
you're and so let's get to this before we get to a really good document. So during one of the things you missed about the bankruptcy proceedings that the judge went through and the new documents that came out were that $12 million moved from one entity to the next, and there wasn't a lot of money left over. And I don't remember the total number, but they started to just say, hey, sorry, we went and paid this contractor. And the judge and your attorney was fantastic. And they said, okay, so
yeah. So we'd suspected from the beginning that LRS had used the state money that they received for lobbying against wolves and sage grouse, that they'd used that to launch the island project. We came to learn through this bankruptcy process that sure enough, they'd taken hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money to launch Lake Restoration Solutions. And then when they saw that things might be going south, they transferred that money back to Big Game Forever, the other nonprofit that Ryan Benson leads. And they didn't declare any of this information on their bankruptcy hearing. So if for the trustee, when he looked over those documents, he just thought, oh, they were paying a consultant. Well, when we got in the hearing, my attorney, she only was able to ask one question because of how short it was, this initial hearing. She said, okay, I'd like to know about your relationship with Big Game Forever. And Ryan Benson said, oh, well, I'm on the board, it's a 501c3. So there are I'm one of 4 board members. Right. And he left it there. She said, well, do you have any other relationship with Big Game Forever? And he said, yeah, I'm an officer. She said, well, what office do you hold? He said, well, I'm the CEO. And the trustee's eyes went wide, like the most blatant kind of related party transfer. And
all they did, so just to slow up, they went bankrupt and all they did is give their money back to themselves, to somebody else, have the LLC empty so that they didn't need to pay you.
That's right. Yeah. And
I just want to pause for Vineyard citizens. Do you believe this man needs an apology? Let's talk about how being good. Like, we all make mistakes and we don't ask Julie or our counsel to be perfect, right? But like, at this point, when you see someone fraudulently violating our freedom of speech, having to go defend it, prove that he did nothing wrong, have him being awarded $3 million, and having Ben's attorneys work for free and not get paid, and then out of the blue, when they win, they just do a shell game and move the money out of the LLC over to themselves of another shell company that they have. That was the bombshell. When I read this in the last 2 weeks, I was like, how do you just stay quiet? Like, sometimes you have to stand up for the right thing, whether you made a mistake or not. You know what I mean? Like Vineyard City residents, you have to get into the minutia of what it is. But anyway, go ahead. So that was the first shell company. The other company that they moved money over to. So
yeah, so I mean, there was a whole constellation of these groups. Ryan Benson's consulting group, John Benson's consulting group.
And they went up and down with it. They were like, oh, okay, so you gave this next amount. Oh, okay, and what's your connection? And they started with, oh, it's just this company. And I said, oh, and we're the head of it. Oh, and we're the head of it. And they just moved one
Yep.
to the next.
So thankfully, we understand that there is a much deeper and broader investigation that's ongoing, that I don't know if it's been initiated by the trustee or if they're just cooperating. So we are hopeful that that's going to be resolved. Now, we're not planning on ever seeing a cent from that. And that also is fine. You know, we never have been in this for any kind of financial gain. But what we feel very strongly about is that, look, our state is a big state now with a big budget and considering big projects. And we need to have the government process that is robust against this kind of abuse. And that's why when we were looking through these documents, we saw this string of text messages that related back to the grama request. I don't know if you could pull that up, Jake.
My mouth dropped when I saw it. I was just, wow.
Because again, the mayor's story, and we've even seen council people come to her defense saying, you know, the lawyers determined that we were right. We only protected what was legally protectable. Well, we found this message from January of 2022. So this is kind of at the heart of the lawsuit. It's also right in the middle, Sean, of when you had submitted your grama request.
It is pre-formal grama application, which meaning this would have been or should have been within that grama delivery. So
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And when we got the grandma, we were like, wait a second, Julie doesn't talk to the Hartleys through text messages, or Hartleys don't talk to Benson's. There's no text messages between any of them.
So this is awesome. Go ahead and explain this. I'm excited for this one.
So yeah, Jeff Hartley, again, this is the double agent lobbyist with the undisclosed conflict of interest for LRS and Vineyard. Here he is reaching out to Ryan Benson, the CEO of LRS. And I'm actually going to put in here into the chat just a little bit of background to understand what he's referring to here. He says, basically, Ryan, they're trying to get these communications between Julie and LRS and between Julie and me. Since you've been neck deep in this, he's been fighting to keep these public records secret for 10 years for this Wolf Project. Taxpayer-funded Wolf Project, zero accountability. Here's Jeff Hartley using his relationship across these two groups to get intel from LRS about how to keep the documents secret. And so look, this is implying that there are multiple documents that are talking about this. There is a strategy for keeping them secret, right? That Julie used the city-funded double agent to get that information and then protect those documents. It's exactly the opposite of what has been said in public as far as, oh no, we're really trying to be transparent and come up front with the people of Vineyard. This is clearly hypocrisy and outright deception, in my opinion.
Well, one of the things that is like it's the second line. Julie Fulmer just got a grama request from her political opponent 4 years ago. So he's obviously spoken with Julie about this, right? So, you know, when you say conflict of interest, sometimes they'll say, oh, well, he works for us for Vineyard because of the railroad. And they say, oh, he works on all these other projects. And you're like, well, no, he doesn't. He's working right now for LRS. This proves that he is advocating or lobbying John Benson for help to hide it, right? And then the other thing that it proves is that there are documents to hide.
Exactly.
Like, okay, you wouldn't have this conversation and reach out if there's not some. So again, Amber, why is it a grant? Like, like we don't hide grants. We don't have a lobbyist come out and reach over to this other company to hide it. So there's just, it's incredible. It's serendipitous almost that the three of them are connected into this thread, and that this came out through the legal process.
Yeah.
When it dropped, I was just like,
this gets back to the irregularity that Sean talked about. When government says, okay, we gave you all the documents. If you find any more documents, let us know and we'll give them to you. right? This is exactly backwards. The grama law is there so that we can have access to and understand what our political leaders are doing. Unfortunately, it is very susceptible to abuse, right? It's mainly voluntary. And I don't know of any examples of when public officials have had their hands slapped for not doing this right? But it's only when we can trap them in a very specific obstruction like this that we can get the information. And I'm sorry, but after fighting this for multiple years, I imagine that many of you feel the same way. This is unacceptable. We need somebody on the inside who can make sure that we're following that our government leaders are following the right procedures.
Well, and also somebody that's advising us, not like the Hartleys, to.
Oh my gosh, that's right.
Like, hey, how do we, instead of just like, hey, this isn't that big a deal. If it went through the council, if we talked about it, then, we would go through and do this. It's like, how many council members, and we're going to, now that we made it public tonight, get this to Chris Judd, get this to Nate Riley, get this to all the council and say, hey, look, is this the type of culture that we want out of a mayor? And this is the type of thing that we're saying, like, do you know that, was this the plan? Were you a part of this plan? Did Julie talk to you as a council? And did you guys vote together as a group to then go tell the Hartleys? Did you send our attorney? Did you all know that Julie reached out to Hartley to then get rid of the evidence? Like, who knows about this?
Totally. And this is an example of why the state requires all lobbyists to disclose conflicts of interest, right? Here you see Jeff Hartley actually abusing his relationship with LRS to get intel to help Vineyard. Well, that's the exact kind of insider racketeering that law is meant to prohibit.
Yeah.
One of the struggles that we had during the grama is the fact that Mayor Fulmer uses personal cell phone, personal Facebook messaging, and a personal Gmail account for all this. So, well, my first thought was, okay, they got tipped off that there's a grama coming. Why don't we just scrub our records?
Right.
Yeah, that's a real fear here, right? So let's say, and this is just hypothetical, but after we see how unscrupulous at least Jeff Hartley has been here, he could have said, all right, well, yeah, Mayor Fulmer, those documents are protected. We don't need to maintain them. Let's just delete them. We have both sides now, and we're all good, right?
Well, and also, your court documents showing that they had 12 million or whatever, and the deep relationship that the Hartleys have had with the Bensons, and that they're advising us to, the mayor. And a lot of times, maybe the mayor, this LRS project wasn't started by the mayor, but it's like, these people are advising you. The Hartleys are. So at what point does this advisement cut off and say, this might not be a person that we would like our mayor to be advised by, right? Yeah. And so the other thing though, and I know there's a lot of things we can't talk about right now that we know, with things in courts and stuff that are, I guess I can't say that. We're not allowed to say a few things right now, but yeah.
What we can say is, it is because of the hard work, the tedious work, the sweat and tears of people like this group that these things are finally coming to light. Right. And there thankfully are a lot of really good people in government, in state agencies, regular citizens that are watching. And I actually find it super inspiring. I appreciated the comments of solidarity in the chat here, but the thing that is most encouraging to me is to see that the people of Vineyard are working together. And I think if you can continue to be fact-based and constructive, right? Say, let's move forward, let's resolve this issue. I think that's going to bring about a huge positive change that's really needed in state government and in city government right now.
Yeah, and the other thing is just not villainizing Sean as, oh, it's a political opponent from
political rival. Yeah, right.
It's like no, it's not. Or hey, you want to conserve wetlands and there's a road on it. Yeah, I have a constitutional right for my land to have it conserved, and if there's a hidden government act to not conserve it, I can engage it that way. And I just want to make sure people understand that this isn't to go after anyone. but it is to correct government processes.
Yeah.
And it's to hold people accountable on that. I wish there were more things that we could share. But this is something that, you know, the companies and the shell companies and all of that. So let's open it up for any questions. Does anybody listening in have a question about the story, timeline, documents? One of the things that I love about Ben is he documents everything into a Google file. And I know you're not going to read the 30,000 emails as our team has done, but we've tried to be as transparent and organizing them. So if there is ever, you know, a Vineyard Council says this or says that, we can always go back to the document as to how we're saying this. And it's very tedious work. So
I don't have a question, just kind of a general comment before everyone else starts asking questions, but just to Ben, I mean, I met Ben as a process to this, and as we're working through this process, I've got to know Jake a little bit more through that. And I think it's inspiring from our side as well, Ben. You know, I'd run through a brick wall for both of you, and I don't know if I've ever met you in person. I'd run through a brick wall for you. So it blows my mind how much effort has been put into this by you and Jake and other teams, and it really is inspiring, and it's so important. You see the state of things just in the country in general, that if people just sit back and don't ask questions and don't inquire about things, then it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. But for the checks and balances that we have, the very few, you know, it's inspiring what you've been able to do and the information you've been able to bring to light. It's amazing. I wish I had a tenth of the knowledge on the subject and everything, and it blows my mind. So,
well, thank you, Sean. And these corrupt actors, which are a minority, right? This is not the majority of people. They are counting on us not connecting those dots and us not watching carefully. And so it is tedious sometimes, but it is up to us, right? That's our form of government. And so
I mean, they say political opponent in this text message, speaking of me, if you replaced Julie Fulmer with Jake Holdaway, I'd have done the same. I just wanted, you know, we wanted answers.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing to do with.
I mean, this is the first ad hominem tactic in the book, right? In the political attack book, try to discredit the person who's asking the good questions rather than answering the questions. And so for me, it's like copy and paste any other Vineyard citizen. The questions remain the same, you guys. You need answers to the questions.
Well, one of the best things, so I've worked with and been at for 20 years at the National League of Cities, National Governors Association, National Association of Counties, got to teach about government processes and whatnot. And like everyone talks about the Constitution, and it is incredible, but the Constitution is what sets process across everything.
Yeah.
When we are, and Sean and you are talking about government processes or documents, it's the only thing that protects us. Process makes it so these go to the planning commission, that these go to the city, that many people are involved, not one person. That way, so many checks and balances, and government is so slow for a reason. You want it slow because then nobody's rights are infringed upon, right? Yeah. And so when Ben's speaking up, you know, and they sue him for, you know, the scientific reasons as to why he doesn't believe it, it's like, wait, the Constitution protects us there. And so, you know, you can't just say, oh, we signed a letter, move on. We said no. It's like,
well, and so one of the other things that we can disclose is that there are a lot of threats going around right now and over the past year. And remember, we shared that link from Peggy Kleimanson in Saratoga Springs. After she shared that information, there was a representative who was unhappy about that, people knowing that information, who threatened to sue her and the other people that were working on that. Well, guess what? They picked the wrong person to threaten to sue. Peggy's a retired attorney, and she knows that she's protected by the Constitution, right? And that's another thing that I hope that everyone walks away with. It is not illegal to ask questions. It is not illegal to share information that you find. right? And if ever anybody is trying to threaten you, please do bring that to one of us, bring it to the authorities. We are documenting every example of that improper intimidation. Some of it has absolutely crossed the line into illegal behaviors. And that's also why we're being careful today, because we're coming up with that strategy right now, right? A portion of it's going to be the lawyers moving forward with some of this. A portion of it has to be the public talking about this, educating our neighbors, because it's not a soundbite, that you can just get in 2 minutes. Many of you just sat through 9 or 75 minutes of backstory, right? And so having that patience, developing those relationships of trust is really important.
So to go into this, Chip's asking, has anyone reached out to a state congressional body about these issues of process and accountability to make Attorney General Reyes?
Yeah. So I can take that if you want, Jake.
Yeah.
So some of this information has been passed over to the state auditor. Unfortunately, some of it has been passed over a long time ago, like a year ago or more. Likewise, Peggy Kleimanson's information was sent to the entire legislature. This was laying out some of those conflicts of interest and lobbying issues. It didn't result in any change. And so we're now trying to figure out who the right person to talk with is. We're also very grateful for some action with the attorneys. But if anybody has a connection or an idea of where we could share this information, please do share that, because we're all ears. We would love for the system to correct itself, right? We think that there's some changes that are needed, but again, this isn't any kind of witch hunt. We want to share with everybody.
And one of the reasons why we have a city council is for checks and balances. You never want one political party. And I reached out to Christy months ago and said, we need to have a meeting. We need to meet. And I gave her all of the information at the time, and she went silent. And, she's never spoken to us again and never said, hey, I have a desire to understand this entire process so that I can hold her accountable, right? It's just more of, hey, there's this angry person over there. And you're like,
yeah.
No. I mean, yeah, we are angry because rights are violated, right? But the same rate, you can't close your eyes. You have to know what the mayor is doing or what happened, so that you can stop it in the future. And one of the reasons why we got together as Vineyard Politico to run 2 people on the city council, Sarah, was so that we could bring a public meeting in January, in February, in March. We can bring Hartley into a public meeting and say, Hartley, sit down, let's go through these emails. And it might be very, but you don't learn, you don't do that. If you don't go through that process, you as a government body can't do that.
Yeah.
And by going through that, not to humiliate him or let him go, but also to allow other cities to know that this is one way in which you could be taken advantage of, because government are taken advantage of. That's why the League of Cities in Utah exists. The National League of Cities is to share good and best practices about how you can be attacked, how dollars could be going through, and so but also, what best practices or policies do our staff need to be in place? Like, first and foremost, because the mayor goes, I have the authority. Should the mayor have the authority? No, right? I mean, going through this process, you'd go, why would the Bensons even be meeting? Let's have you go meet with the roads department, the planning department for these highways. Let's have them go meet with the city manager. Then after it kind of smells the test, let's go through and do a public meeting and on the merits of a $5 million, WIFIA loan, so that hundreds of people can look at this and kick the tires. And so there needs to be a massive process shift and change, because right now she's saying she has the authority and Christy's like, yep, I do. And you're like, no, that we've got to revamp everything of how these grants, or what they call grants. Obviously we know a loan, but yeah. Next question. So Hunter's asking, with new Utah City in Vineyard donating land to the new city with no payment, how is this being pursued? It's a completely different topic, and it's a bombshell that was just dropped in the last day or two. And quite frankly, for those that are involved in Vineyard Politico, I'm tired. I told Sean before we even got into this meeting of, the 20 to 15, I mean, I bet you me and Ben are on the phone 10 hour, a week, scripting through that, right? We have another big, massive project that we're going to have to get into the emails, get into the back and forth, and help understand how that was all planned without, knowing a lot about it. So yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know how to say that, but I'll have to research before I even talk
So-
about.
Yeah, well, and could I make one comment on that? For me, I don't even care what the proposal is, if it's big or small, if it's something that I like or don't like. Right now, I'm so worried that the government process is compromised at the city level, that there's not that due diligence being done, that I wouldn't support anything, even if I thought it was exactly what I wanted, right? Like, we need to get that foundation of trust reestablished, and then we can start talking about long-term development plans.
One of
But
the best things.
who knows what commitments have been made, to Hunter's question, right now.
Right.
Knows if there's compensation for the land or not.
So one of the things, though, I believe in, the Holdaways used this one time about a moratorium, getting into office, if Sarah and I could get another vote and get a 6-month, a 12-month moratorium to just breathe and to go through what is happening and how we're presenting. Utah City is presenting something that's never happened in the state of Utah. I've never seen anything like this, similar to LRS. And we're building this, with very little. I mean, when it hit yesterday, you saw thousands of people in Vineyard going. I had no clue. And it's like, yeah, because our government processes are wrong.
Yeah.
We should have seen this when they started and done more. And they will say, they'll come back and they'll say, oh, we put this document on the website and we found this or that. And it's like, you need to speak a regular layman's term of a citizen, 3rd grade reading level, and say, look, we're entertaining an 80,000, whatever population with no cars. Come to the, so then when people would hear that, they'd go, oh, that's completely new. Maybe I should engage. But, they go 14 years down the road and no one really knows it. So next question, comment about making him sick and really not knowing where to go there. 100% agree there. Chip, what are the consequences for the mayor? National attention to bring pressure and accountability to change. Because of the ongoing nature and more that is going to come out, I don't think we're worried about that. Are you? National exposure and state exposure, like it's going to come.
I think it'll come, but it's also really hard to predict. Sometimes a super dumb story gets into the national attention, and then other times a really important thing doesn't. And that's, I think, something that we can all prepare for is, okay, let's get informed on this so that we can bring this to attention. We want, of course, the local newspapers and media to cover this. Maybe it makes sense too for national coverage, because that can bring accountability.
Yeah. Well, the other thing though that I would say is, and this really aggravates me for somebody that puts 600-700 hours into getting the details right of exactly like, me and Ben go back and forth. We think this happened, but can we prove it? And if we can't prove it, leaving it out. So when you get like an amber letter that just kind of throws out like, oh yeah, we left neutral and asked for a meeting, but you wouldn't sit down with us, that really bothers me. So as citizens, one of the things you can do is just sitting down for an hour and being able to decipher truth from what might not be. And obviously you guys know we spend a lot of time getting into the details. So, we don't really get angry at Amber where maybe she's only spent a couple hours into it. And I think that's one of the hardest parts about this is the mayor has the ability to just kind of shoo off and like the council just believe it, or someone go and believe it and then walk forward. And you're like, that makes me feel really bad that you don't care enough to get to the truth. But as citizens, now that you know this on social media, you can go, we can share this screenshot tonight, right? This thing that you shared. I'm sure Sean's going to put that onto the community page tonight, and allow people to see that. So next thing, what law protects the mayor and city council from impeachment? The state of Utah sucks on this, just to be honest with you, in my opinion. when we set up the state, our state is very unique in our constitution that we do not have a way of removing our mayor through like a ballot initiative. It's just California and a few others have the ability when something's like this at this level of crossing the line. You have the attorney general and the auditor, right? And then literally the council has so much power. The council can sanction her. Getting 3 votes this coming November is huge and critical of like releasing, sanctioning her, doing a public resolution of denouncing what happened or the way in which they treated it, doing a denouncing of Hartley and his involvement, or even just following and helping Julie to, hide the documents. Like there's a lot of things that we can do.
And there was one question before that, Jake, about what are the consequences that could come of this and who would have those consequences? And I think that some of that, look, there should be consequences. The Hartleys should be sanctioned for breaking these lobbying laws. They also haven't disclosed all these expenditures from the lobbying they've done. Depending on whether the mayor knew about the misrepresentation, right? If she wrote that letter without proper approval and knew that it was going to be used for this EPA loan, I don't know, but she could be accountable for that federal criminal offense of misrepresenting information for this $893 million loan. That was the final version of it that got up that high, almost $1 billion of federal funds. So I don't want anybody to for their lives to be ruined, for this to be some big thing. We need answers to these questions because the poor judgment continues to affect all of us, right? These are important decisions that are being made. So the goal for me is to reestablish that trust and accountability.
Well, and one of the things, if you guys watch Vineyard Politico, we have to defend truth. We put up a story about Julie creating a fake entity and her, ghost Facebook accounts that creates these weird profiles that defend her, and also this scary relationship of the Daily Herald. The Daily Herald knows this story and has not posted it. They're our largest newspaper in the county, Janelle, and you just saw her, write that whole thing on, Utah City or whatever, 100% positive. There's a very scary relationship, and I know Ben, she's kind of helped sometimes here or there, but there is a very close relationship of where we're not allowed to ask difficult questions, and hence why we created Vineyard Politico. Is like we're going to put the truth out there. What if we have to create our own media company in Vineyard Politico? We'll create it, right?
But I do see it a little differently, and that's fine. Everybody is coming to different conclusions. I think that Janelle and Julie know each other and get along. That's one journalist at the Herald. If you look at like what Ashton Acey and others have written at the Herald, they have been very rigorous. And so it's important to not dismiss, I think, the whole newspaper just because there's one journalist that sees it in one way. So
thanks for correcting me on that one. Yeah, you're right. It just so happens that Janelle is like knee-jerk.
Yeah, she has that beat, the local city beat. And so for sure.
Yeah, it's like, hey, let's do this positive thing. And even like when the grama request, she's like, oh, the lead thing was Vineyard City is compiled with grama. And it's like, there were no documents, do you know government process?
Yeah.
like the story should have been, there are no documents and there should have been, and why, interviewing.
How did this loan guarantee come about?
How did we not talk about the whole story? I've sent her recordings of everything that we do. So, I post them on Vineyard community page. She knows about them. So, any other questions? Okay. This is not going to be the last one. We hope to be able to talk about more things. Sean, glad you got a little bit of indication on this text message.
Yeah, sorry, I'm composing that post right now. So
to the community page and yeah.
This is a privilege to see the Sean Herring post-creation process. There are legends about this all over the county.
And again, if the council wants to ever meet with us, to go through the 20, 30,000 emails and question the authenticity of anything or any citizen that attacks the great research that we have done, we will be an open book as to the timeline and everything. Like,
yeah. And one of the things I appreciate about that link to Peggy's documents is she also included many of the messages out to the mayor. So for example, you can read my email to the mayor where I expressed concern and said, look, I really think that LRS is committing fraud by using your letter. And if you don't denounce this, I'm worried that you could be liable for those offenses, right? These are not hit pieces. We're not trying to go on a witch hunt. We're trying to help these people. At least that's that. And I'm sure if they were to watch this, they'd say, that you're definitely not helping. That's fine. But can we have a dialogue? I love how you ended that, Jake.
yeah, like, you know, when the council went silent and stopped talking, and I just says like, guys, I want to talk. And they're just like, oh, you know, it's like, if you're going to be in a government position, you have to love government process, and you have to look at the protection of people's rights.
Yeah.
To petition their government, right? Like by being silent and not allowing us to petition, and we've petitioned, will you meet with us? That is a right that we have in the Constitution to petition. And so,
yeah,
we'll continue to do that in a nice way. But thanks, guys. I'll stop the recording if there's no other questions.
Good talking with y'all.
All right.
Are you saying, did you stop the recording, Jake?
Hold on, let me get it right. Where is stop?
Didn't know if people were staying on or.
Mike, I just saw your comment, and you know, my response is I think that we actually